Great, thanks, Chair. Morning, both. Welcome. So we could be at a really exciting moment for UK space sector. As former minister, I look at what's going on around the world, and I see government, correctly in my view, announcing that the science and technology, the R&D budget, 3 big buckets: blue sky, Nobel Prize-winning science; secondly, growth; and thirdly, defence and sovereignty and security. Space traditionally has always, in my view, had a very sort of academic, sort of deep science, astrology legacy in the UK, but feels to me like this is a moment for the space sector to be recognised as completely central to the other 2 buckets as well. So I wanted to start by asking, does the space sector at the moment feel plugged into these 3 big buckets, to the new government strategic vision, to the industrial strategy? What's the mood in the space sector at the moment? Because it has at times worried about being not properly understood across Whitehall in what it can do. Is that changing? And are you now, perhaps I'd like to ask you both, feeling like a sector that is at the heart of the government's sovereign strategic growth security missions?
No. Is the short answer. I think, I'm delighted to give evidence this morning. I think space as a sector is a fantastic exemplar of the way in which you can deliver science diplomacy, be that in the provision of science to support our diplomatic efforts, so using Earth observation to support climate change discussions at COP, for instance, also for being a vehicle to enable those multilateral frameworks to come together. We remain part of the European Space Agency. I think we have a sobering result at the end of last year that I may come back to in terms of the UK investment with respect to our peers in Europe. And I think, space is a sector which is inherently international, and we have some very, very strong evidence of where space as a sector has endured our international diplomatic efforts. I'm thinking of things like the development of the meteorological system during the Cold War. The UK itself has in the past led some brilliant programmes, working in particular with developing countries, a programme that was launched 8 years ago, 150 million of public money, leveraging 650 million of private money. That was a fantastic success, and we've stopped it. And we've stopped it at a time when I think, most of us in the room would argue that we should be upping our efforts on the international stage, not retreating.
Yes, thank you. There's several things I'd love to come back to you on. You were distinguished chair of the Space Agency, so it'd be interesting to come back to that as well. But Graham, headline view in answer to my question?
Yes, thank you. So thank you for giving me the chance to give evidence today. Graham Turnock, I was the Chief Executive of the UK Space Agency between 2017 and 2021, working with Alice during that period. I've since been at the European Space Agency, and I'm now a visiting fellow to All Souls, Oxford, looking at space governance. So my answer to your question would be that I think space generally has an incredibly powerful role in those 2 other domains, so the economy and security. And we're seeing that globally with massive investments, recognising in particular the military and security potential of space. The Americans always heavily invested in it, but we're now seeing a huge investment by the Chinese and also substantial investment by the Indians and the Europeans. The UK has upped its investment in military space. A few years ago, it committed to 1.4 billion additional spend over 10 years, in addition to what it puts into Skynet, the communications satellite, which it spends roughly $1 billion on annually. But we are now seeing that dwarfed by the countries. The Germans themselves committed 35 billion euros to defence space spending in the autumn over 10 years. So that's almost sort of 3 times what we'd be spending annually. And in terms of growth potential, one of the big new areas that's coming through is satellite constellations, especially communications constellations. We have got an interest in the Eutelsat OneWeb system, but really the biggest game in town at the moment is Elon Musk's OneWeb. And there are other constellations coming on stream from Amazon, from
Starlink.
from Starlink. There are other constellations coming on board from Amazon, and again the Chinese. And I think the UK does risk being squeezed out of all of this at the moment, because our investment is not at the level of our competitors, nor are we as central to European efforts as we were before.
Thank you both. Can I ask a supplementary, one on the Space Agency and one on the UK Space Agency, and one on the European Space Agency and the European Defence. Perhaps, Graham, I could ask you about the Space Agency. Obviously, we heard the news in summer that it was being brought inside DCIT. I think the argument for that is, given the geopolitics of space and technology and SATCOMs, some quite sovereign decisions that have to be made. This is part of the sort of militarisation bucket, and that needs to be done in-house, not by a sort of arm's length quasi-academic body. Now, is that... Do you understand that logic? Do you think that is what's happening? And is the sector, through that internalisation, being plugged into new sources of defence funding and security funding? And Alice, I wanted to ask you about ESA and whether we're really getting our value for money there. But Graham, the internals first.
Yes, well, I certainly understand that that's the logic. Arguably, it didn't help when the sort of responsibility for strategy moved from the Space Agency to DCIT 4 years ago, and there was then a sort of separation, quite a bit of duplication of effort on the Space Agency and DCIT's part. So I can see the logic of trying to bring that back together within the department, and that will, I think, facilitate working relationships with the Ministry of Defence, which to my mind is absolutely critical, because if you look at all of the main spacefaring nations in the world, defence is the biggest driver of capability and investment. So if we want space to really keep pace in the UK, I think it has to be linked very closely to the MOD.
Alice, and that sort of links into the European ESA piece and defence. I suppose I'm really wondering, in the great European post-Ukraine defence surge, spending hasn't really happened yet, but the pledge to raise more and spend more, the UK part of that common shared defence, part of NATO, SATCOMs, you'd think that would be a big moment for the UK space SATCOM sector. Can I ask you to follow up your comments on ESA? We're obviously part of ESA, but are we part of that European defence SATCOMs technology piece so that we will benefit, our sector will benefit, do you think?
I mean, I think it very much comes back to the question you just posed to Graham about whether or not our decision-making structures are sufficient in the UK to take advantage of those opportunities, and the short answer is they're not. We need to stop considering space as a purely scientific endeavour. It does, of course, deliver scientific benefits, but, you know, the economic growth potential and increasingly the security, defence and foreign policy, there's a lot of soft power that can be realised through our international space efforts, and we've historically done very well on that. So to come to your question about Europe, again, we need to be humble. We had a latest round of subscriptions to the European Space Agency at the end of last year. The UK put 1.7 billion euros on the table. That was compared to countries like Germany, who put over 5 billion on the table, recognising what is going on geopolitically. Germany increased their subscription levels by 46%, Spain by 102%, France and Italy also increased. The UK was only one of 2 countries to decrease their contribution into the European effort. So I think we have to be very clear about that. Obviously, I am well convinced of the societal benefits of investment in space, and I would argue that those levels need to be higher. But nonetheless, we also have to be more strategic in our choices. For many years, we've, sown 1,000 seeds, and that hasn't been in our best interests. We need to sweat the money better, and I suggest that we do that by making some very strategic, intentional choices on the national capability that we want to deliver in order to be a meaningful international partner.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And that leads perfectly into